You know, between Top Gun Maverick and now Elvis, this summer's bringing a lot of surprises. Elvis. Elvis is directed by Baz Luhrmann and is a biopic chronicling the life and career of one Elvis Presley, you know, the king of rock and roll. And while I'm not the biggest Elvis fan, I was always interested in seeing this movie because it's a Baz Luhrmann directed Elvis movie. And if you've seen any of Baz Luhrmann's other work, like The Great Gatsby or Moulin Rouge or Romeo and Juliet, you know that his style is very over the top, very colorful, very vibrant, you know, it's very in your face. It's got kind of a ADHD editing style. And weirdly enough, that style really works here with Elvis. It's not the most over the top Baz Luhrmann has ever gone, but I think just because Elvis has become this pop culture icon, he's been merchandised out the wazoo. He performed in Vegas for at least 5 years. He was basically the embodiment of the glitz and glamour of Las Vegas. And looking back on what Baz Luhrmann did in something like Moulin Rouge, this is just a match made in heaven. But really what makes or breaks a biopic like this is the casting. You gotta cast the right people to fill these iconic shoes. And really this is a story of two people. It's the story of Austin Butler as Elvis, and it's the story of Tom Hanks as Colonel Tom Parker, his manager. And really the movie has such an emphasis on the Colonel that this movie could have been just called The Colonel and it would have made just as much sense. Although it probably wouldn't have sold as many tickets, but this story really is told from the point of view of Colonel Tom Parker. And for those of you who might not know, Colonel Tom Parker is the person that kind of made Elvis into the icon. He wasn't the one who first discovered him, but he was the one that really pushed him into superstardom, and he's really the mastermind behind the persona of Elvis that we've come to know. But he's also an incredibly shady character. Like, he's not a very scrupulous guy. At the end of the day, he's always looking out for his own self-interest. He didn't really care that much, or didn't show that he cared that much about Elvis and Elvis's personal life. He was just worried about getting him on stage, making that money, keeping the Elvis Presley merchandise train running so that they can live comfortably and he can settle his gambling debts eventually. And I'm actually surprised that Tom Hanks took on this role because he usually doesn't play such villainous or underhanded characters in his movies. He's usually such a likable guy. He's either a complete innocent or a well-meaning person that's got some flaw that they need to overcome. He usually doesn't go this dark and sinister with his performances, and I kind of appreciated that. But I think that was intentional because the movie makes an effort to make Tom Parker somewhat relatable. They don't want to just paint him as a complete villain. Does he do villainous things, especially towards the end of the movie? Yes. And do you really like him much? Not really. But if he was played by someone who typically plays bad guys like, I don't know, Mark Strong, you would immediately hate this guy. You wouldn't trust him. You wouldn't believe a word he says. But because he's played by Tom Hanks, you kind of want to give him the benefit of the doubt, whether or not he actually earns that right. I think because of that, you buy the relationship that he had with Elvis a lot more, because at the end of the day, this is their movie. It's about their relationship with each other. And if you don't buy that Elvis, at least at one point, trusted him or looked at him as kind of a surrogate father figure, the whole movie falls apart. But thankfully, Tom Hanks gives a good performance, although I can't say a great performance because his accent is just all over the place throughout the course of this movie, and it's pretty goofy. And in scenes where it's supposed to be very dead serious, the accent kind of gets in the way because Tom Hanks has such a distinct voice and he's not great at accents, and I don't know, he just couldn't pull it out for this one. I'm sorry, but I just don't buy it. And on top of that, the makeup that they put him in isn't the best. It's very clearly makeup appliances stuck to his face, but I can't say it's bad either. It's in that kind of weird uncanny valley where you know it's all fake and prosthetic, but you can't see the seams and it moves realistic enough. But I will say the first time we see Tom Hanks in this movie, they have this really saggy, gross old age makeup on him. He's supposed to be Colonel Parker at the end of his life, just wandering through casinos, and the first time he popped on screen, I just couldn't hold it back. I laughed out loud at the screen because it was such a ridiculous image and I wasn't expecting it. I was expecting the, fat Alfred Hitchcock looking Tom Parker, but when I see this shriveled up old Tom Hanks, it just looked really funny to me and I laughed really hard until I realized nobody else in the theater was laughing and it was just me. So then I had to kind of keep it back for a little bit. But even so, the makeup isn't that bad. It just takes a little bit for you to get used to wrap your mind around that this is what Tom Hanks looks like and this is the character he's playing. And really by the end of the first act, you've completely bought into this world and this story and you're good to go. But it's just that initial getting used to the fact that this is what he looks like. I don't know, it's an adjustment. But what isn't an adjustment is Austin Butler as Elvis Presley. Now, Austin Butler is not the biggest movie star. I know Austin Butler from the Disney Channel. I grew up on the Disney Channel. I've seen him in a couple different performances here and there. But seeing him as Elvis, I don't see Austin Butler. I only see Elvis. He's got the voice, he's got the mannerisms, the dance moves, the singing, just the stage presence. He owns it 100%. And I have to give extra credit too, because impersonating Elvis has kind of become a genre in itself. You know, you go to Vegas, you see all these Elvis impersonators. To impersonate Elvis is basically a joke now. It's just so overdone, it's cliche. Everyone's got their Elvis voice. But during this movie, I never felt like Austin Butler was doing an impersonation of Elvis. It felt very honest to who Elvis actually was. It didn't feel exaggerated in how a lot of Elvis impersonations can be. You know, they really caricature it. This felt a lot more like how Elvis actually was if you look at archive footage and interviews that he's done. This feels very real. And on top of that, he also has to be Elvis in 3 different eras of being Elvis. Elvis didn't just have one look or persona or invention of himself. He had to reinvent himself a couple times throughout his life, and this movie does a pretty good job at exploring each section. And if I had to pick my favorite section of this movie, it's probably how it handled the early Elvis. You know, when Elvis was first getting discovered and he had a lot of African American influence. You know, he was hanging out at Beale Street, getting some inspiration, hearing what they were singing, incorporating that into his own style of rock and roll that he was basically making up on the spot. I just thought the movie was very respectful with how it handled the influences in Elvis from the African American community. You know, the rhythm and blues and gospel, that really was a huge influence in Elvis's whole career. And also how it handled the controversies surrounding the implications of a white man singing and dancing like a black man in the late 50s, early 60s. I honestly thought that that whole section is really where this movie shined, but then it goes on to the war years, and Elvis needed to clean up his act, cut his hair, shipped him off to Germany. And then when he came back, he was the newer, clean-cut Elvis. You know, the Elvis that we see in Blue Hawaii and Hollywood and movies, and really cheesy movies at that. And as interesting as this part of his life is, the movie doesn't spend that much time here. It spends enough time for you to really get the gist of what's going on, where Elvis is at his career, how popular he is, and how he feels about it. But I would have really liked to see a bit more exploration in this section, because it just feels like there were a couple montages, a couple scenes of them sitting down, and then it's over. Then we move on to the next thing, which is Vegas Elvis. You know, after his big comeback special in '68, he gets the big deal with Vegas and the International Hotel, and then he starts doing his tours. And this is also really cool to see because we get to see where the Vegas Elvis came from. It didn't just come out of nowhere. This was the culmination of him returning back to his roots, but also keeping that merchandised pop culture icon that the later part of his career kind of hyped up around him. But unfortunately, after we get a couple montages of him performing in various venues in very flashy outfits, the movie kind of slows down a bit, and it loses that breakneck Baz Luhrmann pace that we've gotten used to for the past 2 hours and something. And this is the point when I really started to feel the runtime. This is a 2 hour and 40 something minute movie, almost 3 hours of Elvis, and for the first 2 hours of it, I didn't feel it at all. I was like, okay, it's Elvis doing concerts, getting discovered, doing merchandise, and having a great time, having some slumps, but getting back into it. It's been a lot of fun, but after he gets into this big fight with his manager and fires him, it just kind of slows down to a crawl. And I get it for storytelling reasons that it would slow down here because Elvis isn't performing. He's not at peak health anymore. His body is starting to reject this rock star lifestyle that he's become accustomed to. So because Elvis the person is starting to slow down, it makes sense for the movie to slow down. But I feel like for pacing reasons, if that's going to happen, you have to quickly get to the end of the movie. You can't have like 45 minutes of just sitting and moping around and, oh, what are we going to do with the money and the drugs and all this stuff. And I would say that this movie kind of fizzles out by the end. If it wasn't for Elvis's last performance that they show in this movie. And for those of you who don't know, at Elvis's last performance, he sung Unchained Melody, which was a song that he recorded, but it didn't come out until after he died. And actually, I didn't even know it was an Elvis song. I only knew the Righteous Brothers version from Ghost. But anyway, Elvis sang this song in his last performance, and this movie cuts archive footage of him performing this song at his last concert with a recreation of that concert, kind of like what they did in Bohemian Rhapsody with Freddie Mercury with his big concert. But here you see Austin Butler, Elvis, just noticeably worse and less healthy, and his body just starting to break down. And then it cuts to actual Elvis, the archive footage of that concert. The past 2 hours and 40-something minutes leading up to this has shown you context and reasons behind why Elvis struggled so much with this song at his last performance. And when you see him struggle, you think about all the things that have gone on leading up to this point. And it's the moment when I realized I was actually emotionally invested in this Elvis story. A story that, while I was watching it, I was having a good time. I was enjoying it. I was like, oh yeah, this is actually really good. Learning a lot about history and the historical context of Elvis. But when it came to this last performance, it just got so much more real. And I actually started to tear up a little bit. It hit me a lot harder than I thought it would. And I gotta give the movie credit for that. So even though the pacing does slow down a little bit towards the end, that last performance, that finale right there when they have the archive footage in and you realize Elvis was a real person, that he actually existed, and there he is. It works, and I give Baz Luhrmann all the credit for that. But now I turn over to you guys. What do you think about Elvis? Did you like it as much as I did, or was the over-the-top Baz Luhrmannisms too much for you? Whatever you think, let me know in the comments, and if you like this video, be sure to give it a like and subscribe for more content, and hit the notification bell to be notified every time I upload a video. As always, I'm Colby. This is my Nerdy Talk, and I'll see you in the next video.